So welcome to today's webinar. This is our Lunch and Learn Bites series that we do at least once a month. Sometimes we do twice a month. And this is just an educational series for us to talk about things that are going on in the industries, things like what we're covering today with NIST compliance and the new draft revision 3 of SP 800-171. Agenda for what we're going to go over today. We're just going to look through the overall, what is at a high level, what is 800-171 in a brief. We'll go through the overview of revision 3, which is a draft, and you'll hear me call that out several times through this, that R3 is in draft, it is not final. And we'll talk a little bit about that as we go through the presentation as we get towards the end, because if you're somebody who is required to comply to 800-171, you've got some buffer time between now and when it's finalized, and you'll be able to go and obviously be able to provide feedback back to NIST directly. And so we'll talk about that when we get there. Updated security requirements. This is just going to go through overall some of the broad changes at a high level, but we will spend a little bit of time poking into some of the new security requirements or the new families that have been added. So we'll give a little bit deeper dive on that piece of it, but we won't be deep diving everything that changed, because as you'll see, there's quite a few changes, and you'll definitely need the runway to go through, and we'll that gets into the supplemental resources that we'll go through. The supplemental resources, these are a lot of resources that NIST has put together for you to be able to go in and connect the dots on what changed, why it's important, and what the requirements are. And then at the end, we'll go through a quick review of just 5 things to get started and recap on some of these. Any questions before we jump in? I don't see any hands raised, so we will jump in. All right, so SP 800-171 at a high level, what is this? You'll hear the term CUI, or the abbreviation CUI, used a lot. This is about controlled unclassified information. Why is this important? If you are a contractor who is bidding on government contracts where you're doing work or doing jobs for the federal government, in those situations, obviously you are, I'll use the example of a situation where you're processing information, you're winning a contract, and then under this contract you're going to be processing information, bringing information, unclassified government information into your environment and doing work on that. Well, in that case, you're bringing that unclassified information into your environment. Your environment is obviously not owned by the federal government. These are not federal government owned systems. And so therefore, in order for you to be able to qualify for bidding on the possibility of winning those types of contracts, you have to follow the guidelines of SB 800-171. There are also some other supplemental documents and requirements. You'll see a lot of references to SB 800-53, which is more specific to security and privacy controls. You'll see also reference to SB 800-172, which is a supplemental document to 800-171. So a lot of I know that's a lot with regards to mentioning all of the different publications and requirements around these, but essentially that is why this is important. If you're here, you probably already knew that, so this is just review to you. But obviously, this is, when you look at Rev 3, and we'll kind of jump into, why is Rev 3 important? What are the significant changes? If you're familiar with Rev 1 and Rev 2 of 800-171, and you relate it back to, security requirements in 800-53, which is in Rev 5 right now, similar requirements, similar call outs, but worded very differently. And so there can be a lot of confusion as you try to connect the dots between these documents. So at a very high level, one of the biggest call outs for 800-171 Rev 3, which again I'll call out, is still in draft. It's not final yet. But one of the biggest improvements that they made was updating the language to directly map to similar and same language that they use in 800-53 and other publications. A lot of what you saw in Rev 1 and Rev 2 of 800-171 were very short explanations that left a lot open to suggestion. They've basically closed that gap with a lot more specific requirements, and you'll see that as we go through the example of some of the tools that you can use to go and connect the dots on what changed. So we'll get into that here in a little bit. So there's improvements in the overall language in that, yes, it's a little bit more long-winded because it's going to be more descriptive and how you actually comply to the requirements. Again, very similar to the verbiage that you would see in 800-53 Rev 5. Also a little bit more tight with regards to what's required versus what's suggested. A lot of what was in Rev 1 and Rev 2, there are some things that can easily be interpreted as suggestions. There's a lot more clarity in Rev 3 around these things being requirements as a foundational requirement. So lot more clarity in what is and what isn't required. And then you have a lot of resources around the mapping of these tables and analysis, where you've got resources where you can connect the dots. If you're somebody if you're an organization that's already up to speed and in compliance with Rev 2, you've got some time between now and when this is final, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But when this is final, to meet the new requirements, and most importantly, which we'll dive into this a little bit deeper, but most importantly, those new families of requirements, and we'll actually get into that a little bit on the next slide. So when you look at this, the overall here, this is just a kind of a snapshot or a screenshot of the security requirement families within 800-171. Overall, there are still roughly 110 requirements. So the number of overall requirements didn't really change, but you'll notice here as you look through these different blocks, there are some things that were added as well as withdrawn within the categories. The good news is the way this fleshes out, you'll notice within each one of these, as an example, access controls, you'll see that there was 1 requirement added, 5 requirements withdrawn. Does that mean that it got easier to meet compliance? Not necessarily. A lot of what you see that was withdrawn here are actually redundancies between all of the different requirements. As they went through and reviewed this and looked at Rev 2 and what needed to be improved, there was a lot of, we'll call it sprawl over the different requirements, where there were the same things being called out or required in different, and in some cases, requirements that could be interpreted as conflicting with one another. And so there was a concerted effort as they went through to, okay, if this is already covered under one requirement, we're going to remove it from this requirement so that there's no confusion and keep those things in one place. And then you'll obviously, with a couple here, there were a few added, and we'll get into, I think we get in a couple of slides, how do you connect the dots to figure it out, right? There's downloading the entire document and literally painstakingly going through it, which you absolutely can do, maybe should do. But you'll see as we go through the supplemental information, there's an easy way to drill down to where were the major changes, where were the subtle changes, where were the changes in terminology. So we'll get to that. Right now, more importantly, I'm going to hone in and focus a little bit on the new families, because these did not exist in R1 or R2. The new families that have been added, you got planning, which added 4 requirements, system and services acquisition, which added 2, supply chain risk management, which added 4. Jumping into these on the next slide, basically, these are about being more prepared. Obviously, supply chain risk in and of itself is a big change, or a big addition, I should say, not really a change. But foundationally, if you look at it, planning, which is in section 3.15 of the document, and obviously there's much more to it than what I've put on this slide. This is just kind of calling it out at a high level. But for the planning, this is about putting a requirement in there that you're actually documenting and disseminating to your organizational people, people in the roles that actually need to make sure that these things are happening, that you've got this documented, planned out, all the policies and procedures are put in front of those who need to know. They understand it, they signed off, everybody understands what's going on, and more importantly, that you actually have a schedule and a plan put in place to review and update the policies and procedures as needed. System and service acquisition. This is the new section 3.16. This applies to engineering principles and specification design of your systems, modification of your systems, how these things are tracked, services and who you're getting those services from. That kind of bleeds over into the supply chain risk management piece of that, section 3.17. And that's developing a plan around your whole supply chain. And when you think about your supply chain, right, again, kind of jumping back to the beginning and why you need to follow, why if you're required to follow these requirements, why it's important is obviously you've got the federal government wanting to make sure that you're in compliance with all of these policies and procedures. But additionally, right, you have contractors, suppliers, hardware, software vendors, services, MSPs, on down the line that you're doing business with. And so that's where the supply chain risk management piece of this comes in, where you've got to be able to understand and know for those third parties that you're doing business with, are they in compliance? So if you're doing business, for example, I'll use the example of a managed service provider. If you've got a managed service provider in your environment, right, they have to be vetted. Are they following the guidelines of 800-171, so on and so forth? So this is just putting some tighter controls and definitions around not only what you're doing within your organization, but within the organizations that you are also doing business with that are supporting your ability to work with the federal government on a contract. I'll pause real quick because I feel like I'm going real fast. At this point, any questions? Again, feel free to raise your hand. I can unmute your mic. Or if you don't feel like speaking, feel free to throw questions in the chat. I might not notice them immediately, but when we get toward the end, I'll glance over, look at the chat, and make sure if I've got any questions in there that I do stop to answer those before we end the session. Don't see any hands raised. Don't see any comments in the comment section yet, so I'll just press on. Supplemental resources, and I'm going to provide you with the how to get here, where do you find these things here in just a moment. But real quick, this is one of the supplemental resources that's used. It's a big Excel spreadsheet basically, where you can download this spreadsheet. And I know this is a little blurry on your screen probably. So this wasn't meant to be able to actually sort through and show you and start going through every little change. But this basically at a high level is a resource that you can use to very quickly see what changed. And in this example, you'll see over on the far left side on about the fourth column, you'll see the SP 800-171R2 security requirement. In this example, it has been filtered down to significant changes. You'll see in the significant change column that they've got the X there. So this shows you where in that fourth column, there's the existing R2 definition. And then in the fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth column over, you've got the initial public draft R3 version. And as you can see, as I was talking about earlier, in the R2 version, kind of a quick sentence or two description that it leaves, again, a lot open to interpretation as to whether or not you met that security requirement. In the past, you probably looked at that and you said, okay, now I need to go look at SP 800-53 so that I can get a more descriptive version of what I need to do to comply. Now they've moved that language over to where in the R3 version, you're going to see what looks more like and is very tightly aligned with those same security requirements in 800-53. So makes it a lot easier for you to not to have to skip back and forth between documents, and you can just use this as a primary resource. And you can filter this as when you get in here, you'll be able to filter this down to significant changes. You'll be able to filter it down to new requirements. So again, going back to the new families, you can filter this down and just look at a view of the new families and those requirements. So a lot you can do here. And again, just think of this as just a good shortcut guide, other than downloading the entire document and reading through it, which again, I do recommend that you do thoroughly read through the document, but to get that quick view of changes and what's significant, this is a great resource for you to go through and just be able to very quickly connect dots and see side by side the requirements changes between R2 and R3 and draft. Any questions on this? This is pretty straightforward, but I just want to make sure this makes sense. Leon asks where we can find this PowerPoint. We will provide, we're recording the webinar, so you'll actually be able to go back and watch this video in its entirety. But I can also provide a copy of this as a PDF to anybody who's requested. So Leon, I'll follow up and send you a PDF copy of the deck. Absolutely. Thank you. Where can you find all of these things? These are all available on the NIST public website. I will actually very quickly, I am going to paste this link into the chat for those that would like to jump on. This is a direct link to the website that I have a snapshot on the right side of the page here. Let's just see if I can get to the copy and paste on this. There we go. All right, so I've just put that link in the chat for everyone. This is where you go, the spreadsheet that I was just talking about, where you can go in and download and see all of the different, all of the quick views of changes and sortable views of changes and new guidelines. That link is where you see this little green outline in my snapshot. That link is within there. There's also some additional supplemental resources in there, going back to the fact that this is controlled unclassified information. There's a document that you can download. Again, it's another spreadsheet. Some people love spreadsheets, some people hate them, but it's another spreadsheet that goes over all of the definitions of what is controlled unclassified information. So a lot to go on here. The other big thing too, and I'll talk about this a little bit as we get towards the end here, which we're fastly approaching actually. When you look at this too, again, remember that this is in draft. Rev 3 is in draft. Right now, they are in what we call the comments period, and that's open to the public. And so this also on this supplemental resources page, you can get to and access. They've got a standard form that you can download for questions and comments that you want to make about this. And then you can actually submit that directly back to the folks at NIST, and those things are actually being considered. So if you, for example, are going through and you think, I think I have a better way of explaining this, or I think I see a few things in here that could be tweaked to make this better, they're receptive to those comments and those questions. So do feel free if you feel the need to participate, because they are going, that's basically where this is at right now. As we get into Q1 of next year, Q1 of calendar year 24, they will go through final review, and then in Q2 publish the final document. And then from there, obviously, we're basically, from this point, we're in June 2023. By June 24, so you've got about a year between now and everything that happens before this becomes, okay, now Rev 3 is final and is the new requirement. So quick review, 5 things to get started. I've already talked about it, but visit the NIST website. Beyond what the link I just gave you, beyond the focus in on just 800-171 R2 and R3 and draft, I have found the NIST site to be a wealth of information. So whether it's this publication, 800-53 Rev 5, 800-172A, like all of these documents obviously are posted on their website, but there's a wealth of supplemental information for all of them. So if you haven't spent a lot of time there, definitely recommend that as step one. Go get familiarized with that website and the resources and documentation that are available for you there to make sure that you've got the tools to be organized and compliant. And then familiarizing, I know we went through it a little bit here, but definitely deep dive. I covered the new families at a very high level. When you get into the document, whether you're looking at the spreadsheet to quickly sort to it, or you've actually got the PDF of the full Rev 3 document, you definitely want to go through and read through these They are roughly in the document. It's roughly 5 pages worth of it, 5 to 6 pages worth of information. So definitely, as those are new families, deep dive into those to make sure that you're prepped. Again, by Q2 of next year, when it becomes required, you want to be ready to go. So you've got some runway there. I already talked about it, but obviously utilizing the change analysis documents, those can be quick shortcuts for you to get up to speed on the most significant changes, other than just painstakingly reading through the document. I talked about the timeline, but obviously the fourth item down here, know the timeline. Public comment period is again through July 14th. So going back to what I was talking about with going to that page, having the form, and there's just a simple email. You fill out the form, simple email address that you attach the form to, and email your comments and questions to. So if you do want to participate, provide feedback, recommend changes, recommend improvements, you have from now until July 14th to be able to submit those to that email address. Again, FY24 Q1 is final public draft, and then the requirement will be finalized and required by Q2 of FY24. So you got about a year. And then the fifth point here, again, I've reiterated it a few times, but remember that it's in draft. So you don't have to freak out. It's not like these requirements became ironclad today and you have to conform. As of today, accountability is still to Rev 2. Right now, this is just about preparation to get ready for Rev 3 once it moves from draft to final. With that, last thing that I'll throw out is a little bit of a commercial message here. So obviously, we here at Mavenspire are very proud of our organization and our ability to provide advisory services and tactical engagements. I'm not going to drain the slide on you here, but this is very relevant to what we're talking about today, because we can absolutely be a resource for you as you go through this process. Some of you may have engaged us and allowed us to help you assist with compliance to R1 or R2 in the past. As you prepare for R3, you might engage our help again. If you're new to this and you're just getting into, hey, I'm just getting into becoming a government contractor, and I'm just now getting my environment in shape. Wherever you stand, wherever you are in your journey to get compliant, we can help you. We can be an additional resource. So just understand that we've got expertise in this. We've got a lot of experience in helping organizations not only get to compliance, but help maintain compliance, especially going back to the requirements around supply chain. That's a big, I don't have anything on the slide here that's specific to that, but we do have some services around cyber risk discovery and risk assessment that can be great tools for you to understand not only what your own risks are internally and where you can uncover parts of your environment where you need to be brought into compliance, but also your third-party risk, going back to the whole requirement around your suppliers, your managed service providers, so on and so forth. We can help you gain insights there. So little commercial message there for us at the end. Again, we're always here to be a resource for you. I hope this has been useful information for you. Again, this wasn't intended to be a crazy deep dive into everything that changed, because that would probably be like 2 8-hour sessions, back-to-back days. So, but I hope this gave you the tools and the insights that you needed to go out and start preparing. We will actually wrap up the webinar.